Okay. Good afternoon, everybody, and thanks for joining us again for another episode of Through the Storm, a podcast about resilience, raw, and transformative journeys of recovery. Here we share stories about faith, stories about personal growth, and stories that will inspire and hopefully motivate you to choose a life of recovery. It is definitely worth it. I'm your host, Jay Red Andrews, and today we have a special guest. I have my buddy, Star Halbisen. Say hi, Star.
Hi, thanks for having me. Appreciate you inviting me today.
Thank you for coming. Thank you so much. Yes, Star, we're going to jump right in here. And the first question is, okay, where did Star come from?
Star. Oh, the name Star.
Yes, the name Star.
Well, right. So, he, they pronouns. I prefer they pronouns.
Okay.
Get that out of the way, right? So, Star for me comes from the fact that all the elements in the universe were just forged in exploding stars in the early universe, right? So. Mm-hmm. So everything that we're made of is just stardust. So it kind of comes from that because it reminds me that, we're all connected and that we're all come from the same source, and that separation between us is kind of an illusion.
Yeah.
It's a very Buddhist thing,
I like that. So I think it's a very fitting name, is what I'm saying. All right. So can you tell us just a little bit about yourself, your story, and why you found recovery to be necessary?
Yeah. Well, first off, I am a community health worker, a CDCA. I'm a third-year social work student at CSU, originally from the Toledo area. I'm on a subcommittee of the board at Harbor and Bridge, so we're actually getting ready to open a sober house and all that jazz. So that's what I'm working on. And then you wanted to know about kind of how I got into recovery initially.
Yeah, what made it a necessity for you? What was going on in Star's life where Star said, you know what, I'm going to turn things around here and I'm going to get some help?
Yeah. So it was about almost 3 years ago. I went to a treatment center here in Cleveland, B. Riley LGBTQ Treatment Center. Yeah, great place. But at that time, I had just moved back home from Florida. When I was in Florida, I had got hit by a car while I was walking across the highway, just a couple miles from Disney World, actually. So I was at a really low point at that time in Florida, hit by the car, really, had no option but to come home. I had a walker and I couldn't, do anything. So this was just a few years ago. So about 38, I think. Yeah, 38 maybe. So, I'm a 38-year-old walking around with a walker. We go to Walmart. I got to get in one of those scooters.
At least you got to get excuse.
Yeah. So that was tough. But so I came home, and it was just the last place that I wanted to be. I did not want to come home. I wanted to be in Florida. I was absolutely miserable there. I hated it.
Coming home?
Coming home. Yeah. Okay. I just absolutely just hated it.
Too much from the past?
It was just
memories, like what?
It was like I had lost all my friends in Florida, and it was like I just didn't have. I only had family up here, pretty much, and it was just, and I love them tremendously.
Sure.
And they're very supportive. But
I think we all know family can be a little dysfunctional.
Yeah.
A little difficult to deal with. I get it.
So I didn't want to be there. I was pretty miserable. I was miserable. And I was drinking pretty much like daily, getting up in the morning, doing shots of Fireball and chugging twisted teas, for breakfast.
Oh. No judgment.
So, I knew that was a problem, with my healthcare background. I know the physiological aspects of, alcohol detox are dangerous. It can be dangerous.
And just the pure physical. Absolutely.
Exactly. Yeah. So with alcohol and benzodiazepine withdrawal, those can actually kill you. Yeah, those are the two that can kill you.
Wow. Okay.
So I knew there was an issue. I knew that I was going to have to eventually do something because I didn't want to be, the person that wakes up in the morning with the shakes, and just it gets really bad. It can be very bad. Yes. But that's not really what made me want treatment. What happened was, like, in my drinking at that time, I got just really drunk one night, and for the first time ever in my life, like, I was very mean to my nephew. Like, I was just being very belligerent and, like, was trying to fight him. And, like, never have I ever been like that, my whole life.
So this was just like the tipping point.
Right, exactly. So it wasn't being, I was trafficked in Florida. I wasn't being trafficked. It wasn't getting hit by a car. Was never losing my license. But as soon as it affected somebody I loved, and I could see, like,
That's so funny you would say somebody you loved and, like, not think about yourself as being one of those people.
Yeah, another person that I love. Right.
I get that, though. I get that. Yeah.
So it was like I had no regard for my own health or safety or whatever, but when it affected him, it really made me realize that I didn't want to be the person that turned into a jerk towards our family, or I didn't want to be the person that lost their family, because you hear about a lot of people like, oh, my family won't even talk to me, right, or they disowned me, I have nowhere to go. Like, I was not willing to lose my family. Like, I just was not, I couldn't let that happen, because I love them dearly, and I would never, want to hurt them intentionally. Sure. But, in retrospect, I realized, I was kind of hurting them because they were going crazy, worrying about me, and that didn't occur to me that was harmful, right, as well.
And sometimes you don't even recognize that kind of hurt until you're on the other end of it, looking at somebody you desperately want to get sober and watching them struggle.
So I had that outburst with my nephew, and I just was like, no.
You said, I'm going to treatment. Yeah. Get help. Did you know at that point in time that treatment was available? Did you know about that? Okay.
Yeah. I knew treatment was available. And I knew where I could go, and I knew all the right things to do.
And how did you know that? Was this like you had experience prior to?
Right. Just from working in healthcare, and pretty much just that kind of knowledge.
Because there's a lot of people out there who may or may not be aware that there is help available, and then how to go about getting that help once you determine that you want to get it.
Yeah, and there's also, I think, a lot of stigma around getting help. I think a lot of people, including myself, kind of, I didn't want to go that route, because it's like, that means addicts and junkies go to rehab, and there's all that guilt and shame built up around substance use disorder.
I'm not one of them.
So right. So that's tough for me,
and then just like basically voluntarily giving up your freedom, even if it's for 30 days, 60 days. I get that. Yeah. So I understand completely. So you came back. You were home now. And how long were you at home before this incident took place? Before you actually went and got some help?
Probably maybe a month and a half, 2 months back home from Florida.
Okay. Yeah. And then the place that you chose was the B. Riley?
Yeah, I just Googled. I Googled LGBTQ friendly rehabs. That was pretty much the only one that popped up. Yeah. And I'm like, and it was close. Cleveland was only an hour and a half away, and I had called a couple places, and they wouldn't take me because of my broken leg.
Really?
Yeah. They're like, well, we have stairs, and they don't want the liability. And I'm thinking, well, that's stupid. Don't you have,
just I don't know, whatever roadblocks and you get it. Okay, so you chose B. Riley because it was the only LGBTQ friendly, at least seemingly, advertised online, right? So what was it like your first day, week at B. Riley? What did you think?
Well, at first, like, my mom and stepdad drove me up here from Tiffin, so hour and a half drive, and we get to the place, and you like when you get there, you just see like this big like warehouse, on your right, and like it looks like it's all like fenced in. It looks like very industrial.
Yeah.
And you like go back through this drive.
You
and
look like you're about to be transformed.
Yeah, really. And it's like, where are we? And then like you go through and you see, okay, there's this brick building and it says B. Riley, and it's just like, okay, so they're not dropping me off in a warehouse, thank God. But it does look kind of sketchy. It
wouldn't have been the worst place I had, I'll tell you that.
But they came in with me, helped me bring my stuff in, and left me in the care of B. Riley. And I know on the way home, my mom was like, should we go back there and get him? Like where did we just drop our son off at?
Is this going to work?
They're like, oh my God, I don't know. But so they didn't have to come get me. It's okay. And, it was really cool. It wasn't what I expected. I expected kind of something very sterile and clinical, but it was more like laid back,
more like home
kind of environment. And really just the people were, I guess the people there were what I needed at that time. Just they're very understanding and very friendly, LGBT friendly.
Right.
It's just like I can be who I am, I can be myself and feel safe. And I think if I would have went to a men's only facility, it would have been more challenging, because there's just that aspect of not knowing if I'm safe or whatever.
All the insecurities. Yeah, I get that.
Just to be able to feel like you're with your tribe.
And I will say though, we're very fortunate here in Cleveland. There are a number of treatments that are available that are very helpful and very welcoming, even to the LGBTQ community now. Stella Maris, for instance, plug. And yeah. So I just, I don't know if there's a number of them. Actually, that was not a true statement, but I know that there's at least one other. So we could use more, right? We could use more. And, some of the other ones that are just male only, I remember going to them and just feeling like, and this had nothing to do with the other people, right? The problem was in my head. I was the one that was so scared of being who I was, and I was the one who was so insecure. I don't know what they really thought of me, because I thought so low of me that everyone else had to.
Right.
Head, So, so you're at B. Riley, and how long did it take before things started to really change for you? Whether it's inside your external life, like how long was it before you started to feel better?
Oh gosh. Well, you said change, so I'm going to go with that. Okay. Immediately, things started changing for me. My first experience there was I came around Halloween time, right? So it was the Halloween party, which was like maybe a day or two after I got there. And at the Halloween party, I drank hand sanitizer.
You didn't.
I did. And I thought, what the hell am I doing? I tried it. I didn't like drink. I didn't even feel anything, but I tried it. And then I'm like, what am I doing? Like, this is not what I'm here for. This is the same old thing that I've been doing. Like, I need to tell somebody. So I did. And I told.
Do you feel like you were appropriately hard on yourself for that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I told the group, because I knew it was confidential and they couldn't go tell on me, in whatever certain group it was. I told them about it, and we processed it, and it felt good to actually practice that, to be honest with myself and everybody else. And eventually, I talked to staff about it, and I did get in a little bit of trouble, but not really. You didn't get put out. Right, exactly. They just, because I was honest about it, and, they consulted with the group, with all of my peers too, and they were like, well, what do you guys think? Yeah. And, everybody was like, he did the right thing. So I didn't get kicked out or anything like that, and I was honest, and that was, within the first 2 or 3 days, a big change. That was a big thing. And I think
it's great when you get to be rewarded, beneficially in a positive manner for being honest, and you're not like chastised or punished beyond, what I believe is appropriate.
Exactly.
And these environments can be difficult in that situation sometimes.
Yeah.
But so So things started changing for you immediately, but did you know where you were going to go when you were getting through treatment? Did you have a plan already in place? And like, what did that look like? And how did you get help making that transition?
Yeah. So when I went into it, I knew that sober living was an option. Mm-hmm. And I thought that I probably should try it. You know, I figured I needed to avail myself to everything. Because I've been using and drinking for 25 years straight. You know, I think a 30-day or 60-day stay in rehab is not the end all, cure or anything.
So true.
So yeah, I went in there and I knew that I wanted to look at least consider that. And case management at B. Riley, kind of told me about how it worked, and it seemed like a really good option. So I went with their sober living as well.
And did you enjoy that?
And I'm glad I did. I did enjoy it. Yeah, I ended up being the house manager.
Oh, nice.
For quite a while at one of the houses there, and I really enjoyed that too. Mm-hmm. But I get a lot out of being in that environment with my peers.
Yeah.
And people that are going through the same thing.
Right.
It's tremendous support.
Good. So tell me about some of the challenges that you faced early on, mm-hmm. whether at the treatment center or even in the sober living. Like, what were some of the bigger, like, blows, I would say, to your serenity, your peace of mind, or perhaps even like your security,
Yeah. I mean, just having the broken leg was bad, but then I had to have another surgery. And that was really tough because they had to open my leg back up and like take out all of these titanium screws and rods and then replace them. And then I had to walk with a cane again. I had to walk with a walker again and then a cane again. So, I had went through like a whole year of not being able to walk. So that was the biggest challenge for me. And that wasn't even related to sobriety, really.
Well, it could be. But did you take meds?
When I was in the hospital, I did. Yeah.
Okay. Under doctor's care.
Yeah. But that was probably, trying to do that and get sober. That's hard. That is very difficult, especially when you're in pain constantly and
yeah,
you can only
not in a good mood when I'm hurting.
Right.
At all.
But and I still have pain, every day. So I take care of that. I go to pain management and, take care of my health. I didn't really have any big blows, and besides that, really, I mean, I had some legal issues that I took care of, which is basically paying fines and communicating with the court and stuff.
Yeah.
There wasn't a lot of big stuff, for me.
What about like difficult clients, other difficult residents or staff members? Was any of that a problem for you?
Yeah, so, I'm a social work student, and I really take the values of the social work profession seriously. And also just the values of being a community health worker and a CDCA, they're all pretty much the same, very similar. So I'm in this environment where I know, what's supposed to be happening or, what you're allowed to do. And I'm seeing things and I'm like, oh God, they can't do this or, so that was difficult, yeah. Like dealing with like, being in a place that I really appreciate, but also like seeing things that I disagree with. And, there was a couple times where I brought that to attention of staff.
Was it well received?
And no. As a matter of fact, I think that they were retaliated against me. But, I have a lawyer and I know, whatever.
That's unfortunate too.
They didn't mess with me after that. But yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad that you had the willingness to advocate for yourself.
Absolutely.
And that you had the resources to support you and back you up on that, because there's so many people whose voices are just silenced in those kind of situations. And that their rights are not being protected or looked after.
Absolutely.
But hey, I'm just glad places like that are still open.
Absolutely.
And that they have, a welcoming policy where people can come and get some help. So yeah, you've mentioned a couple times now that you've been in social work. and in the medical field.
Mm-hmm.
So what is that shaping up like for you now? Are you still using that?
Oh
And
yeah,
all this other stuff. Okay,
absolutely. So,
because you sound extremely employable.
yeah, absolutely. I mean, like I really would love to work right now, but with being in school full time.
Oh, okay.
And
that is a job.
yeah, and I'm on disability, and it's complicated. But I would really like to probably start looking for something part time.
Yeah.
But yeah, I've always really just been a hard worker and like to be involved, in the scene of like nonprofit, not just recovery, but nonprofits and social justice issues, community education, advocating, for migrant farm workers. I've done that, so I've done a lot of things related to that.
Sounds like you have a really big heart.
Absolutely. So right now, I facilitate a meeting as a volunteer, Recovery Dharma, at Stella Maris on Wednesdays at 6 p.m.
Nice. You should check that out. It's a great meeting. I'm there.
And that's really like part of my mission, I feel, is as a person in recovery and as a professional, is to really like advocate for change, specifically stigma, right? Like, it's important for clinicians to use language that's clinically accurate. So, like, for example, if you were my patient and you passed or you failed a drug test, somebody might say, "Oh, you're dirty. You were dirty for whatever THC." And now that's not clinically accurate language, and it's stigmatizing to tell somebody that you're dirty or your urine test is dirty. That word "dirty" enforces stigma. So we want to stay away from that, and as clinicians, we have to be the example and set the precedent. So it would be clinically accurate to say, your urine test came back positive for ... You don't want to say dirty.
No, you're dirty.
As a
dirty boy.
Yeah,
dirty.
Or even just as a clinician, saying like, "Oh yeah, I work with addicts." Okay, not quite clinically accurate, and it is stigmatizing. Even if people identify as addicts, as a clinician, we want to say, I enjoy working with people in treatment for substance use disorder.
Right.
So we're using people first language, stuff like that. So that's kind of part of my mission, I think.
That's really great to educate people about that.
Yeah.
I personally, I've adopted Person in Recovery.
Mm-hmm.
And I watched that on some documentary years ago. And of course, these people had longer than I do, and longer than I did. But I still find it a little bit more acceptable in society, a little less shaming too.
Exactly.
Because I have an illness. I have an illness, not a deficiency morally. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
I may have some of that too, but I'm just saying.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Oh, star.
So we can just model the appropriate behavior and just set the precedent. We're gonna treat people with dignity and educate them. And
you've been educated. Don't catch you slipping. Don't let us catch you. So,
what I was going to say is, in regards to that clinical language, it makes a difference. Studies have shown they've described a patient as an addict, and then they described a patient as a person with substance use disorder. The person that they described as an addict was less likely to get the care that they needed than the other person that they described as a person in recovery or whatever.
Really?
And that's just like in a nutshell of what the studies are. But you can find them.
So maybe
somewhere.
that helps somebody stay sober a little longer. Huh?
Right.
Changes their image of themselves.
Yeah, because it's about the attitude of the doctor or whoever's treating them. Because by describing the patient in that way, it makes the doctor more judgmental towards the patient and less likely to give them the treatment that was needed.
Yeah.
But you'd have to look at the studies, for more details.
Would you say
along those lines,
we all need a treatment for self-confidence, self-esteem?
Yeah.
I think Use Healthy does that when we get in here. So I want to go back a little bit to something that you mentioned a moment ago. You said you were getting ready to be a part of opening a sober house.
Yeah.
If you're prepared, would you tell us a little bit about that sober house?
Yeah,
and
sure.
What's going to be about and everything?
Yeah, of course. Well, originally it started when I was working for an organization, Trials for Hope, and they rent space in the basement of Harbor and Bridge Community Center, which
Jonathan.
Yes, John, we love him.
Love you, John.
So I was working there, and I was, got to meet the executive director of Harbor and Bridge, and was all, very close with him. So, well, in the course of working there, it's an old church building, and it has what do you call it? The house where the priest lives next to it, or whatever.
I thought you were going to say the sacraments.
There's a name for it. What do they call that? Parsonage or something.
Yes.
So there's the old priest house next to the building, and
it's a parsonage. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah. Parsonage. That's a weird word.
It is.
But so I went to the director. We were just chatting, and I was like, you got that house right there. Why don't you do something with it? Make it into a sober living. You could help people, coming out of rehab and giving them a place to stay, and just kind of explain to him what that even means, because he didn't have a clue. But he really liked the idea. He went to the board of directors, and they really liked the idea, and they were like, yeah, let's do it, and you're going to help. And I'm like, yeah, I'd be honored to help. So we have formed a committee, and we started having planning meetings and raising money. And
so you guys all set to now?
We're getting there. So It's been a really long process. We want to be certified in Ohio, which you don't have to be. It's voluntary certification. But
what does that mean if you get certified?
So you get certified through Ohio Recovery Housing. You have to meet certain standards and requirements.
Does it qualify you for grants or other funding?
Exactly.
When the clients come?
Yeah, exactly.
That's good.
So if you're certified, then you could apply for grants or funding for residence rent or lots of other things.
That's a good thing.
So we're going to get certified. It's been about a year of planning and just raising money, and now we're finally seeing the light at the end of the tunnel.
Awesome. That's great. I bet that's really rewarding feeling. So what's going to be your role there?
So my role is I'm the director of recovery services. So everything.
Sounds like
so just me and him and a couple others that are in advisory positions. We're doing everything. But this house is.
So you are working.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah.
Back to the previous aforementioned question.
Yeah, I'm working for free. Kind of.
Well, I mean, I get it.
But the house is going to be. It's a really nice house. We're going to provide paper towels and toilet paper, and we're going to have a lot of things that you need that the residents won't have to worry about.
That's awesome.
Coming in off the bat, and it's going to be a little different. At least the sober houses I've seen, they have certain rules, and they're usually like you have to go to so many AA meetings a week, and you have to have a sponsor, which is great. Good. If that works for you, that's fine. Now, that doesn't work for some people. So what about people like me that doesn't work for, and they go to sober living, but you have to do that. But there are other programs. We've mentioned Recovery Dharma, Smart Recovery. So we want to make sure that in our policies and procedures that we have an opportunity for clients to do Recovery Dharma or some other program.
You want to be more inclusive.
Right, because, we want to be evidence-based. The evidence is that, the AA is not the only program. It's not, the end-all, be-all. Sure. And it seems like when you get into recovery, it seems like that's the only thing.
Sure.
It's
almost like Christianity.
Yeah. And people need to have, people need choices. And we learn in social work that, you're an expert. You're the expert in you, right? You might come to me as a social worker thinking that I'm an expert. But I'm looking at you that you're the expert. So people need to have choices. And we want to do that.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I'd probably take a lot of the strain and stress away from a person who's, brand new and just trying to stay open to whatever might work for them. When they're ready, we're going to look up Harbor and Bridge for the information about sober housing. Star will get some more information, and we'll probably make an announcement on the show about it
Okay.
whenever you get back to me
For
about
sure.
that. Thank you so much for being
Absolutely.
on the show.
Thanks for having
It's been a pleasure
me.
talking to you. And just remember, guys, that no matter how difficult the storm, you can make it through